Everyone has a set of beliefs, but what most people think of as belief is typically something highfalutin, something like religious belief or a set of political ideologies. We'll get there, don't worry. But at its base, a belief is simply something you think is probably true, not always based on the best of evidence, but you're starting with a basic assumption about the world. A really simple belief is you believe that it will probably rain. And how do you come to this conclusion? You look outside, it's cloudy, the clouds have taken on that sort of darkish gray tone, and so based on prior experience, you realize that it's in all likelihood going to rain. Now that doesn't seem like a belief, but essentially all our beliefs are based upon these sorts of things. We receive evidence, or at least perceived evidence, and we make certain assumptions about the world. And so belief can begin with something as minuscule as thinking or believing it's going to rain, to something as massive as you think that there's an omnipotent creator of the universe in a universe with billions of galaxies that explicitly decided to make a particular species of apes on this planet as opposed to all others and has a profound interest in everything you're doing. That's also a belief, and everything in between, obviously. Now, in recent months, I must confess, I've been engaging in what I regard as a kind of field research, kind of sociological field research. I've been talking a lot, in as much as I can, to people who are quite progressive. Now, with respect to this field research, there are certain parameters here. For example, if I really think they're absolutely bat fecal matter, nuts, loony, then I can't really have a conversation with them. But as long as they're somewhat calm, no matter how different and wild their beliefs are, I've tried to talk to a bunch of them. And with some of them, I'm engaged in a multitude of conversations. And I'm obviously not a progressive. I make no secret of that. I'm also not particularly right-wing, despite what a lot of people think. I ultimately don't know where I sit on this political spectrum. And to be perfectly honest, it's not terribly important to me that I designate myself as X or Y or Z or whatever. But yes, I've been engaging in this sociological field research to truly understand their perspectives. And so I've been asking about things like intersectionality theory and the process of socialization. Because as I mentioned, we all make certain basic assumptions about the world, and I do too. And oftentimes we're wrong. I'm often wrong about things as well. But as an example, in my case, of something I assume to be true based on what I believe to be evidence is my somewhat profound belief, if you want to call it that is deep belief in this sense, that we are basically animals. So human beings are animals. We are one animal species amongst many on this planet Earth. And from that observation, a lot of things follow. That in itself doesn't necessarily tell you a whole lot, although I suppose it could. But when you're trying to track human behavior, understand why we do things, how we do things, how it all works, then the observation seems to track on very well to observations you can make about other species of animals, especially about closely related animals such as gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans, etc. So that is my starting point. That's very different, as I've come to observe in recent weeks, from the starting point of progressives or people on the far left. Their perspective is that everything is fundamentally based on socialization, something akin to culture. So the reason why you think a certain way, behave a certain way, do certain things has almost, in many cases, nothing to do with biology or anything related to that. There's some variation there, but most of the progressives I've talked to do not believe biology has any effect whatsoever. And if you do think that it has some effect on us, but not much, but generally speaking, it's totally irrelevant. Biology has nothing to do with human behavior and human outcomes. It's just socialization and different hierarchies of oppression, unironically, from top to bottom. And so it was in this context that I joined in many conversations about everyone's favorite topic, sex differences, differences between men and women. Why are men different from women, for example, in their behavior? Because the vast majority of progressives who are not completely batsoid will acknowledge that there are obvious physical differences, body size, strength on average between men and women. But where they will not concede ground is in the realm of the psychological. So, for example, why are women overwhelmingly more represented in the social professions as opposed to other professions, such as engineering or in the sciences? they're much more likely to study something like psychology or indeed biology as opposed to physics, and chemistry is somewhere in between. So you see this variation, just as an example, and I would posit that millions of years of evolution that divide the sexes, that have shaped different types of psychologies due to different reproductive needs, is the primary driver behind this. They will look at socialization, and we'll get to some of the nitty-gritty details in a bit, as well as history. You see, the reason why women are not involved in these professions is because historically they weren't allowed to be. And as a result, you had this cascading effect of socialization that resulted in decades, if not centuries, of women being pushed in a certain direction, and we're only now recovering from that. Another example that was discussed, why are there so many women that are kindergarten teachers or elementary school teachers as opposed to men? Well, in contrast to them, I'm willing to concede that there are some elements of socialization. There are other countries, say outside the United States, where you're more likely to see men, adult men, interact with young children who are kindergarten age or somewhat older, but they're still not the majority. So there is some kind of effect going on here that is related to particular facets of a culture. But the basic assumption is fundamentally different. And that's why the conclusions are also very different. Now, of course, I think I'm correct about this. I've spent a lot of time, amateur, yes, but a lot of time looking into the biological basis of our behavior. It just seems so very likely that the reason why men and women are different in certain core ways is due to evolved differences. But if your basic assumption is that biology means virtually nothing when it comes to behavior, and that's their basic assumption, then that's not a possibility. And as I said, for the record, I conceded that there are some elements of socialization, i.e. environmental factors. I brought up, for example, the infamous Nordic gender paradox of equality, where in Scandinavian countries, more women are involved in social professions than in countries where things are not egalitarian. And in those non-egalitarian countries, countries which generally tend to be third world, generally have a lower standard of living, women are incentivized by the environment to pursue things such as programming, engineering, because it is much more profitable. So the environment does have an effect. It's just what something like the Nordic gender paradox tells me is that all things being equal, when women have a choice, when they have options, they tend, on average, to pursue certain things as opposed to another. And the difference here, and this is really the core of the issue when it comes to quote-unquote true belief, is that I'm willing to concede at least the possibility I might be wrong. I might be wrong that the majority of differences between men and women in terms of their behavior and life outcomes is down to biology and the genes that have co-evolved with that biology over time. I might be wrong about that. I don't think I am, but I might be. And I'm also willing to concede there are certain elements that are almost certainly related to the environment and socialization. What I've noticed with these people, and something very similar to the kind of thing you observe with truly fanatical traditional religious beliefs and believers, is that they cannot even concede that it might be possible. They can't say, well, I think I'm probably right about this. There might be a chance I'm wrong. They can't say that. I'm saying that. I'm probably right about this, but I could be wrong. Now, granted, I would need a whole lot of evidence shown to me that made it abundantly clear that our evolved nature, our animalistic nature, has nothing to do with biology, that all these millions and millions of years of mammalian evolution have resulted in no differences between the sexes. I would need a lot of evidence to believe that's not true. But in their camp, they have different assumptions, and so biology doesn't factor into it at all. It has no place whatsoever. There are a few exceptions. I talked to one girl who said, yeah, it's like 20%, but 80% of it is the environment and socialization. Okay, but that's not much. Many of them, perhaps the majority of the people I talked to, said no, it has nothing to do with it. Biology is just not a factor. So their basic belief is that men and women have identical psychologies in every respect, and society then pushes men in certain directions, sometimes negative ones. This is where patriarchy hurts men too comes from, and certainly pushes women in certain directions. And that is, of course, also this theory of patriarchy. Of course, I asked about the origin of patriarchy, and that's where things got a little bit fuzzy, because I asked repeatedly, where does it come from? Why did it emerge? They didn't really have any clear answers. Now, we moved on from various topics related to sex to just general things like racism, different outcomes. And I propose a problem within the intersectional framework. It's basically unfalsifiable. And how do you measure these things? So within the intersectional framework, which is primarily based upon, for lack of a better word, oppression, I guess, or not getting a fair shot at life, you have all these different categories. So if you're a gay Mexican man in the United States, do you have a higher or lower status than an African-American woman who's descended from slaves, who suffered a great deal in the past? Who has the higher status? How do you determine in such cases who gets what when you're allocating resources? But there is some clarity in some cases that are a lot clearer. So white men, of course, are at the top. They receive nothing, followed by white women. But eventually you do get into these categories of, yeah, you're the gay Hispanic guy versus the African-American female. I also never received a concrete answer to this. And my primary issue with this model being unfalsifiable can be found in what I propose to them as the biggest problem with this is, let's fast forward 300-400 years in the future. If there's still a little bit of disparity between groups, is that then related to prejudice, bias, or something else entirely? And I asked repeatedly, how do you falsify this? What is the metric? And one of the progressives was honest enough to acknowledge, I don't know. So this is the problem with it, fundamentally. There's no mechanism by which you can gauge these things long term. There are historical events and things that you can mention and adduce, but long term, there's no mechanism for gauging whether or not it's ultimately true, which means in theory, 2,000 years could go by, and as long as you see disparities between different groups of people, whether women, men, ethnic groups, religious groups, then that will be attributable to prejudice. As I said, I don't agree with this stuff, but I thought it was worthwhile engaging with these people because ultimately this type of true belief really reminds me of fanatical religious belief. Different assumptions about the nature of our reality lead to different conclusions. But the primary difference is, because we all make these assumptions, you have to be willing to change your mind, or at least be open to the possibility you might be wrong. None of us is omniscient. We just don't know everything. And the possibility that some things might be complicated, as in 2 or 3 things could be true at the same time. There could be, for example, certain social factors that go into how women decide to choose professions. I gave the example of third world countries. But there could also be biological factors, and they all influence each other in different ways. So it doesn't need to be a 100-0 thing. It can be something like a 60-40, a 70-30, a 50-50, and any number of combinations. But if you believe you have the one true belief, you're the true believer, whether it's progressivism or fanatical Christianity, or take your pick, then it is impossible, literally impossible, to refit your beliefs to the paradigm of what the evidence tells you. And I have to say, for the most part, I always knew this, but actually engaging with these people and seeing, to be perfectly honest, how completely unreasonable they are. Some people making wild claims such as every disparity you see between groups of people in the United States is due to racism, literally everything. You know that's not true because no aspect of human behavior, human life, human outcomes is 100% of anything. It's never just 100%. So you know there's something kooky about this thinking. Anyway, I thought I'd share this. I'm not a particularly content person, but I would be even less content with myself if I were rigidly attached to something and completely unwilling to revise my beliefs based on the possibility of evidence. But since you're dealing with true believers, it's probably not really worth talking to these people if what you're looking for is a productive conversation in the sense of changing minds, coming to some sort of consensus, coming to some sort of compromise. It definitely isn't worth it. I can tell you that much. Nonetheless, fascinating stuff. And as always, thank you for tuning in. Many special thanks to my patrons and donors on PayPal. You guys are the best. Without you, there's no channel. You are the lifeblood of this channel. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. As for everybody else, if you can leave a like, share, comment, subscribe to the channel, it'd be much appreciated. If I'm still alive, may the gods watch over you. Bye-bye for now. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.